Dawn breaks over the airfield as frost glistens on the wings of the Stuka dive bombers. Hans-Ulrich Rudel moves with precise, economical gestures, a man whose existence has been distilled to routines and responsibilities. His calloused fingers trace the familiar contours of his aircraft as ground crews scurry about, preparing for the day's mission. At 32, his eyes carry the weathered look of someone who has seen too much sky and too much death. The Eastern Front has become his office, the cockpit his sanctuary, the thunderous dive his signature. Behind the mechanical precision of his daily routine lies a man carrying the weight of thousands of sorties and countless decisions. What happens when the most decorated pilot in German history begins to question the cause he serves? The leather flight logbook sits on the small desk beside Rudel's narrow cot, its worn cover bearing the marks of countless handlings. Inside, each mission is documented with meticulous precision: dates, times, targets, results. The pages tell a story of devotion, not just to country, but to accuracy itself. Hans-Ulrich Rudel wakes at 0400 hours, precisely 5 minutes before his alarm is set to ring. He's been doing this for years now, his body's internal clock more reliable than any mechanical device. The small wooden barracks are quiet, though he can hear the soft snoring of Hauptmannweber 2 rooms down. The Eastern Front is never truly silent. He rises in one fluid motion, feet finding his boots beside the bed before his mind has fully emerged from sleep. The morning ritual commences: 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups. Not for vanity. Rudel has never cared much for appearance, but because a pilot must be strong. The G-forces during a Stuka dive demand physical resilience. The cold water from the basin shocks his system to full alertness. No hot water today, or most days. Such luxuries are increasingly rare as the war grinds on. He doesn't complain. Discomfort is merely another condition to be adapted to, like poor visibility or enemy fire. As he shaves with practiced strokes, Rudel catches his reflection in the small mirror. At 32, the face looking back at him seems to belong to someone older. The eyes hold the 1,000-yard stare of a man who has seen the earth from above, watched it erupt in flame and smoke, day after day, mission after mission. "You were meant to fly," his father had told him when he was just 10 years old, watching birds circle their home in Salish. "Something in your spirit belongs to the sky." His father, a minister, had seen it as God's purpose for his son. How strange that this divine purpose would manifest in dropping bombs. The memory fades as Rudel buttons his uniform, each motion precise. The Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds, Germany's highest military decoration, remains in its case. Daily missions require only standard dress. The medals are for parades and propaganda photographs, not for work. He opens the logbook, reviewing yesterday's entries with a critical eye. 2 sorties, 3 confirmed tank kills. A mechanical issue with the rudder that requires follow-up. Notes on fuel consumption that might prove useful for today's mission planning. The logbook is both history and future, what has been done and what must be improved. The mess hall is beginning to fill as he arrives, but the early hour means it's still predominantly ground crew and mechanics preparing for the day ahead. They nod respectfully as he passes. The legend of Rudel has grown to mythic proportions. The pilot with over 2,000 combat missions, destroyer of more than 500 tanks. He acknowledges them with a slight nod, uncomfortable with the reverence. "Coffee, Herr Oberst?" A young mess attendant appears at his side. "Thank you." The coffee is weak, more ersatz than real, but it's hot and familiar. Major Erich Sommer slides onto the bench across from him, his own tray laden with the meager breakfast offerings. "Sleep well, Hans?" "Well enough." Rudel has known Sommer since flight school. They've buried too many mutual friends to maintain formalities in private. "Command sent new orders at 0200. Sommer's voice drops. "The Russians are massing armor near Targul. Intelligence suggests a major push." Rudel nods, processing the information. Another day, another attempt to hold back the inevitable tide from the east. He thinks of his logbook, wonders how many more entries it will contain before the war reaches its conclusion. "I've requested our squadron get priority for the anti-tank ammunition," he said. "The modified cannon on my Stuka can penetrate their T3 Thors if I can get low enough." How low is low enough these days? Lower than most would consider sane. A rare half-smile crosses Rudel's face. Wing Commander Barkhorn enters the mess, eyes immediately finding Rudel. His expression suggests the day's briefing will not bring good news. Barkhorn had once been as idealistic as the fresh-faced pilots, who still arrived occasionally from flight school. Now his features are permanently arranged in an expression of grim determination. "Gentlemen," Barkhorn acknowledges them both. "Briefing in 20 minutes. We have a busy day ahead." As the commander moves on, Rudel finishes his coffee in a single swallow. The weak dawn light is just beginning to filter through the windows. Another day begins, indistinguishable from hundreds before it. Yet Rudel knows that in war, routine is an illusion. Each sunrise could be the last. He thinks of his logbook waiting in his quarters. Today's page is blank, waiting to be filled with whatever the hours bring. Like every day, it begins with certainty and order. Like every day, chaos waits in the clouds above. The Iron Cross lies in its velvet-lined case, nestled beside several other decorations. Rudel rarely looks at them anymore. The weight of honor has become a burden, each medal representing missions where others did not return. Victories in a war whose greater purpose has grown increasingly unclear. The briefing room smells of cigarette smoke and coffee. Maps cover the walls, red pins marking Soviet positions, blue ones showing German strongholds. The disparity between the two colors has been growing more pronounced with each passing month. "Gentlemen," Major Schroeder, the intelligence officer, taps his pointer against the largest map. His eyes are bloodshot from too little sleep and too many reports. "Our reconnaissance flights have identified significant armor movements in these 3 sectors. The pointer circles areas near Targul, each tap carrying a note of urgency. Rudel studies the map from his seat in the front row. The Russian advance is methodical, probing for weaknesses. He's flown enough missions to recognize the pattern, the gathering storm before a major offensive. We estimate at least 200 T-34s mobilizing here." Schroeder continues, with infantry support moving through these valleys. His pointer traces the likely approach routes. "Command has prioritized these tank columns as our primary targets today." From the back of the room, a voice that Rudel recognizes as Captain Mueller's rises with an edge of frustration. "With what fuel reserves? Half our squadron couldn't fly yesterday due to shortages." Schroeder's expression tightens. "Fuel has been requisitioned. It will be sufficient for today's operations, meaning it won't be tomorrow," Rudel thinks. The unspoken reality of dwindling supplies hangs in the air like the cigarette smoke. "Oberst Rudel," Schroeder turns to him. "Given your expertise in anti-tank operations, Command requests your assessment of these defensive positions." Rudel rises, approaching the map. The room falls silent. His tactical insights have saved lives before. "The terrain here favors their approach." He traces a finger along a valley. "Their tanks will funnel through this pass. If we concentrate our efforts here rather than dispersing across all 3 sectors, we can create a bottleneck." He turns to face the room. "Hit them where they have no choice but to cluster." Colonel Weber, recently arrived from Berlin, clears his throat. "Command has specified that all 3 sectors must be engaged simultaneously." Rudel meets the colonel's gaze. "With respect, sir, dividing our limited resources across 3 fronts guarantees we will be ineffective at all of them." The tension in the room thickens. Weber represents the increasing disconnect between headquarters' strategic vision and the tactical reality faced by the men who fly the missions. "Your concerns are noted, Oberst Rudel," Weber says stiffly, "but the orders stand." Rudel returns to his seat, exchanging glances with Sommer. They've had this conversation before, following orders that make little strategic sense, watching good pilots die for negligible gains. As the briefing continues with weather reports and ammunition allocations, Rudel feels a light tap on his shoulder. It's Erwin Henschel, his rear gunner for over 1,000 missions. They're setting us up to fail, Henschel whispers, his face weathered from years in open cockpits. We fly the mission we're given, Rudel responds quietly. But we'll do it our way once we're in the air. Their partnership has transcended mere duty. In the confined space of the Stuka's cockpit, they have developed an almost telepathic understanding. Henschel knows when Rudel will dive without being told, can anticipate his maneuvers in combat, shields his rear with unwavering vigilance. Weather conditions are suboptimal, the meteorologist is saying. Low cloud cover over the target areas, visibility approximately 3 kilometers. Winds from the northeast at 20 knots. Perfect for hiding our approach, Rudel thinks, already formulating how to use the weather to their advantage. The Stuka is not a nimble aircraft. Its strength lies in precision, not evasion. Cloud cover might give them the seconds needed to line up the perfect attack run. The briefing concludes with the distribution of target dossiers. As Rudel reviews his, he notices that his squadron has been assigned the most heavily defended sector, a backhanded compliment to his skills. Outside, the sky is lightening to a dull grey. The weather report was accurate. Low clouds hang like a shroud over the airfield. As officers disperse toward their aircraft, Rudel feels the familiar weight settle onto his shoulders, responsibility for his men, his mission, the ever-narrowing path to something that might still be called victory. He touches the outline of the Iron Cross through his uniform jacket, not out of pride, but as a reminder of what has been sacrificed to earn it. Today will demand more sacrifice still. The worn photograph sits in the breast pocket of Rudel's flight jacket, close to his heart. It shows his parents standing in front of their modest home in Silesia, his father in his minister's collar, his mother's hand resting on his father's arm. The edges are frayed, the creases deep from countless foldings and unfoldings. He never flies without it. The pre-flight inspection is a ritual. Rudel never delegates. Aircraft malfunction at 20,000 feet forgives no one, regardless of rank or medal count. He walks the perimeter of his Stuka with deliberate steps, eyes scanning every rivet, every control surface, every inch of the airframe that will soon be his thin barrier against both gravity and enemy fire. She's in good form today. Her robust, says Feldwebel Krause, the chief mechanic assigned to Rudel's aircraft. Pride colors his voice. To maintain the Stuka flown by the Luftwaffe's most decorated pilot is an honor among the ground crew. The cannon alignment, Rudel asks, running his hand along the massive 37mm anti-tank weapon mounted under the wing. The modification is his own design, a tank killer that has proven devastatingly effective against Soviet armor. Recalibrated at dawn, sir. Accuracy should be within 2 meters at your usual attack altitude. Rudel nods, knowing usual attack altitude means mere meters above the ground, low enough to see the expressions on the faces of enemy tank crews. It's a height most pilots would consider suicidal, yet it has become his signature approach. The lower the altitude, the greater the accuracy. The greater the risk, the higher the reward. And the oil pressure gauge, Rudel continues. It was reading high yesterday. Replaced the sensor and tested the system. Should be accurate now. The inspection continues methodically. Control cables, fuel lines, radio equipment. Each component checked, each potential failure point addressed. The thoroughness is born not from fear, but from experience. Rudel has seen too many good men die from preventable mechanical failures. As the inspection concludes, Rudel pauses to extract a letter from his pocket. It had arrived with yesterday's supply transport, thin paper bearing his mother's neat handwriting. He hadn't had time to read it before today's mission preparations. Finding a moment of privacy in the shadow of the Stuka's wing, he unfolds the letter. His mother's words are carefully chosen, their true meaning hidden between lines that would pass censors' scrutiny. The harvest has been poor. His father's health is declining. The local authorities are becoming stricter. Life in the homeland grows harder as the war stretches on. Between the lines, Rudel reads the unwritten message. Germany is losing on the home front, as surely as it is being pushed back on battlefronts. The great promises of victory seem increasingly hollow against the reality of daily privation. He refolds the letter, returning it to his pocket beside the photograph. The contrast between his parents' dignified faith in both God and country and the realities of a war turning inexorably against Germany stirs an uncomfortable dissonance. Rudel's father had taught him that one's duty was sacred, but also that truth must never be sacrificed, even in service to the state. The mechanics have outdone themselves today, comes Henschel's voice as the rear gunner approaches, interrupting Rudel's thoughts. Everything to your standards. Yes, Rudel responds, folding away his momentary doubts along with the letter. The aircraft is ready. Henschel studies him with the familiarity born of sharing countless combat missions. And the pilot. Rudel meets his gaze. Also ready. The conversation is their ritual, as much a part of pre-flight preparations as checking the control surfaces. The truth beneath the exchange remains unspoken. Another day, another mission, another opportunity to not return. Around them the airfield buzzes with activity as other crews complete their preparations. Young pilots, some barely 20 years old, project confidence they haven't yet earned. Veterans move with the measured economy of men who understand precisely how tenuous their existence has become. Rudel climbs onto the wing of his aircraft, pausing to pat the Stuka's fuselage, not from superstition, but from genuine affection. The ungainly aircraft, nicknamed Butcher Bird by enemies and allies alike, has carried him safely through more than 2,000 missions. Time to fly, he tells Henschel, who nods and moves to his position in the rear cockpit. As Rudel settles into his seat, his hand brushes against the photograph in his pocket. For a brief moment, he allows himself to wonder what his father, the minister, would say about the war now, about the growing gap between official proclamations and the reality evident to anyone with eyes to see. Then the moment passes. Duty call. The switch flips in Rudel's mind, transforming the philosophical man into the pragmatic warrior. The aircraft, the mission, the sky, these become his entire world now. The map of the Eastern Front is spread across the briefing room wall, its surface marked with colored pins and grease pencil notations. Blue for German positions, red for Soviet. The blue pins have been steadily retreating westward for months now, a visual record of a war turning inexorably against the Reich. Rudel studies it one final time before departure, committing key features to memory: river crossings, artillery positions, known anti-aircraft batteries. Weather's deteriorating faster than predicted, announces the meteorological officer, rushing into the room. Front moving in from the northeast, cloud ceiling dropping to 800 meters in the target area. Colonel Weber frowns. Can we still fly? Yes, sir, Rudel answers before the meteorologist can respond. The Stuka can operate in these conditions. He doesn't add that the worsening weather might actually work to their advantage, providing cover from Soviet fighters that have been increasingly dominant in the sky. Weber studies Rudel's face, searching for hesitation or doubt. Finding none, he nods curtly. Proceed with the mission as planned. Outside, the ground crews are making final preparations, loading ammunition and topping off fuel tanks. The distinctive inverted gull wings of the Ju-87 Stukas form a row of dark silhouettes against the grey sky, like predatory birds waiting to take flight. Despite their aging design, the dive bombers remain devastatingly effective in ground attack roles, particularly in Rudel's hands. The pilots gather for a final briefing beside the aircraft, maps unfurled against the fuselage of Rudel's Stuka. We'll approach from the southwest at 2,000 meters, he explains, tracing the route with his finger. Maintain tight formation until we reach this ridgeline, then drop to 1,000 meters and split into attack groups. The younger pilots listen intently, Whatever their private thoughts about the war's direction, in this moment, their focus is absolute. In the air, distraction equals death. First target priority is their armor, Rudel continues. Second priority is artillery. Ignore troop concentrations unless directly threatened. He looks at each pilot in turn. Questions. A young lieutenant speaks up. Sir, intelligence mentioned new anti-aircraft emplacements near the primary target area. We'll use cloud cover where possible, Rudel answers. For the final approach, we'll come in low, below their effective engagement altitude. How low, sir? A grim smile touches Rudel's lips. Just high enough to clear the trees. The engine start sequence proceeds with practiced efficiency. Across the airfield, Stukas come to life, their Junkers Jumo engines coughing, sputtering, then settling into a powerful rumble that vibrates through the airframe. Rudel performs his cockpit check methodically, gauges, controls, communications. Radio check, he speaks into his throat microphone. Loud and clear comes Henschel's response from the rear cockpit. One by one, the other pilots report in, their voices crackling through the headset. 9 aircraft, 18 men. Responsibility for all of them rests on Rudel's shoulders. Not officially, as he isn't the highest-ranking officer flying today, but practically, his experience, his skill, his judgment are what they will follow when the chaos of combat engulfs them. The flight controller gives the signal. Rudel releases the brakes, and the Stuka begins to roll forward, gathering speed down the grass runway. The familiar sensation of acceleration presses him back into his seat. The vibration intensifies as the tail lifts, then smooths as the wheels leave the ground and the aircraft climbs into the gray sky. One by one, the other Stukas join him, forming up in the practiced V formation that maximizes visibility and defensive coverage. Through gaps in the clouds, Rudel can see the landscape below, the patchwork of fields and forests, villages and roads that make up the contested territories of the Eastern Front. It looks peaceful from above. The fires, the shell craters, the columns of refugees, all these details are lost at altitude. This detachment is both blessing and curse for pilots. The distance makes the killing possible. The knowledge of what happens below makes it weigh on the conscience. As they climb higher, the temperature drops rapidly. Frost begins to form on the canopy edges despite the engine's heat. The clouds thicken around them, enveloping the formation in a gray void where each pilot can see only the aircraft immediately adjacent to his own. Titan formation, Rudel orders over the radio. Maintain visual contact. The weather is deteriorating faster than predicted. Just as the meteorologist warned, the cloud layer that was supposed to be scattered is now a solid mass, turbulent and open. Flying through it is like navigating through cotton wool soaked in ice water. Command, this is Stuka leader. Rudel radios back to base. Visibility severely limited. Request updated weather report for target area. The response is broken. Static overwhelming portions of the transmission continuing to deteriorate. Front moving faster than. Exercise your judgment. Rudel checks his compass, his altimeter, his airspeed. The mission parameters have changed, but the mission itself remains. Somewhere ahead, through the clouds and across the battle lines, Soviet tanks are advancing. Whether he can see them yet or not, his duty is to find them, to stop them. Maintain heading, he orders his squadron. We continue as planned. The thermos of coffee sits wedged between Rudel's seat and the cockpit wall. It's a small luxury in the midst of war, a touch of warmth and normalcy in the cold, mechanical business of combat flying. The liquid inside has long since cooled, but he'll drink it anyway when the moment allows. The formation breaks through the cloud layer at 1,800 meters. Below them, the landscape unfolds in stark relief, a vista of snow-patched fields and dark forests cut by the silver ribbon of a river. Rudel orients himself quickly, comparing the terrain to his mental map. Target area 20 kilometers ahead, he announces over the radio. Drop altitude to 1,000 meters. Maintain formation integrity. The Stukas descend in unison, engines growling as they lose height. Through breaks in the clouds, Rudel catches glimpses of movement on the ground, the telltale dust clouds of mechanized columns. Command was right, Henschel reports from the rear cockpit. Heavy armor concentration at coordinates Echo 5. Rudel banks slightly, adjusting their approach. Vector. All aircraft adjust, heading 3 degrees east. We'll come at them from the direction of the sun. The tactic is old, but effective. Attacking with the glare behind them makes the Stukas more difficult to spot until they're already diving. It's these small advantages, accumulated through experience, that have kept Rudel alive while so many others have fallen. At 8 kilometers from the target, the first flak bursts appear. Black puffs of smoke erupting around the formation. The Soviet anti-aircraft gunners have spotted them. Maintain course, Rudel orders calmly. Prepare for attack pattern. The tension in the cockpit is palpable, but familiar. Rudel's heart rate increases, but his breathing remains steady. Fear exists, but discipline contains it. His hands on the controls are relaxed, movements precise rather than jerky. I count 30+ tanks, comes the voice of Lieutenant Meyer, flying on Rudel's right wing. T-34s, moving in 3 columns. Perfect, Rudel responds. Exactly where intelligence said they would be. A rare occurrence in this war of fog and friction. At 5 kilometers, Rudel gives the order. Attack formation. Stukas. 1 through 3, with me on the eastern column. 4 through 6, take the center. 7 through 9, western column. The formation splits precisely, years of drilling evident in the smooth transition from travel to attack positioning. The Stukas spread out, creating space for their signature maneuver. Rudel pushes his stick forward, and his Stuka noses over into a dive. The dive brakes deploy automatically, their distinctive howl, the Jericho trumpet that has terrified Soviet troops for years beginning to wail. The sound is psychological warfare built into the aircraft's very design. The altimeter unwinds rapidly as the ground rushes up. Rudel's focus narrows to the lead tank in the column, his targeting reticle settling on its vulnerable top armor. At this steep angle, his specially modified cannon can punch through the thinner roof plating that conventional horizontal fire cannot penetrate. Anti-aircraft fire intensifies, tracer rounds streaming past the cockpit. Rudel makes minute adjustments to his dive angle, compensating for wind and the target's movement. The world outside the cockpit blurs, except for the tank growing larger in his sights. At 400 meters lower than most pilots would dare, he fires. The 37mm cannon under his wing bucks, sending its armor-piercing round downward at tremendous velocity. Through the sight he watches the shell impact precisely where intended. The tank shudders to a halt, smoke beginning to pour from its hatches. Without pause, Rudel pulls the Stuka out of its dive, the G-forces pressing him hard into his seat as the aircraft levels out just meters above the ground. He's now flying directly over the Soviet column, so low that infantry fire rattles against the Stuka's underside. Hit confirmed, Henschel reports, swiveling his machine gun to strafe infantry scrambling for cover. Direct penetration. First tank disabled. Rudel banks sharply, bringing the aircraft around for another attack run. Through his canopy, he can see the other Stukas executing their own dives, bombs and cannon fire striking the Soviet formation. 2 more tanks are already burning, their ammunition cooking off in secondary explosions. Watch your altitude, 7. Rudel calls out, spotting one of his pilots pulling out of his dive, dangerously late. For 20 intense minutes, the battle unfolds with mechanical precision. Dive, fire, climb, bank, rip. Each pass presents new challenges, shifting targets, intensifying anti-aircraft fire, the need to adjust tactics as the Soviet forces adapt. Between attack runs, Rudel reaches for his thermos, unscrewing the cap with practiced one-handed movements. The coffee is cold but strong, a momentary respite in the rhythm of combat. The familiar taste centers him, a brief touch of humanity in the midst of destruction. By the sixth pass, Soviet resistance has stiffened. A new threat appears, the distinctive silhouette of Yak-9 fighters approaching from the east. Enemy aircraft incoming, Rudel announces. Complete current attack runs and reform at point Bravo 7. We've done enough damage for one sortie. As he banks away from the battlefield, Rudel takes inventory, 4 Stukas showing damage, but all still airborne. 8 tanks confirmed destroyed, several more disabled. The Soviet advance temporarily disrupted. A successful mission by any measure, yet Rudel feels no triumph. Only the cold calculation that they've bought perhaps one more day for the retreating German forces further west. One more day in a war that grows increasingly impossible to win. The bullet hole in the cockpit glass catches the sunlight as Rudel banks his Stuka, a stark reminder of mortality's thin margin. 3 centimeters to the left, and Germany's most decorated pilot would be another name on an ever-lengthening casualty list. The jagged perforation has been there for 2 weeks now. Replacement canopies are increasingly scarce as supply lines stretch thinner. Bandits at 2 o'clock high. Henschel's voice crackles through the intercom with practiced urgency. Looks like yaks, at least 4 of them. Rudel scans the sky, quickly spotting the Soviet fighters descending from higher altitude. Sleek, fast predators, hunting the slower Stukas. All aircraft, Titan formation, he orders over the radio. Prepare for defensive action. The Stukas pull closer together, a proven tactic that maximizes the coverage of their rear gunners. Against faster fighters, their only advantages are discipline and coordinated defensive fire. They're making their approach, Henschel reports, swiveling his MG-81Z machine gun to track the incoming threat. Coming in fast, Rudel watches the lead Yak-9 growing larger in his mirror. The Soviet pilot is good, approaching from the Stuka's most vulnerable angle, using the sun to mask his approach until the last possible moment. Without Henschel's vigilance, they might not have spotted the danger until too late. Evasive pattern 3, Rudel commands, pushing his stick forward abruptly. The Stuka responds with a diving turn that forces the pursuing fighter to overshoot. The maneuver sacrifices altitude, precious energy in aerial combat, but disrupts the Soviet pilot's attack run. The air fills with the hammering of machine guns as Henschel and the other rear gunners open fire. Tracer rounds crisscross the sky in lethal patterns. The formation's coordinated defense catches one of the Yaks mid-turn. Smoke trails from its engine as the fighter rolls away. Clearly damaged. Good shooting, Rudel acknowledges, but there's no time for celebration. The remaining fighters regroup quickly, more cautious now but no less determined. Through the bullet hole in his canopy, a thin stream of frigid air whistles into the cockpit. The sound mingles with the engine's roar and the staccato bursts of defensive fire, the discordant symphony of aerial combat. Lieutenant Müller's voice cuts through the radio chatter, tight with alarm. Taking heavy fire. Port engine hit. Rudel spots Müller's Stuka immediately, trailing dark smoke, losing altitude rapidly. 2 Yaks have singled out the damaged aircraft, circling for the kill. Hang on, Müller, Rudel says, banking sharply toward the threatened aircraft. Stukas 3 and 5, with me. The rest of you, continue to rendezvous point. It's a calculated risk. Diverting to help Müller means extending their exposure to enemy fighters, but abandoning a comrade is unthinkable. Rudel pushes his throttle forward, wringing every bit of speed from his aging aircraft. Coming in behind you, sir, acknowledges Lieutenant Weber in Stuka 3. The 3 German aircraft form a protective triangle around their damaged comrade. Henschel's machine guns chatter continuously now, forcing the Soviet fighters to break off their direct approach. Can you maintain control? Rudel asks Müller. Affirmative, comes the strained reply. But losing altitude steadily, don't think I can make it back to base. Rudel scans the terrain below, his mind racing through options. There's an emergency strip at sector. Can you make 15 more kilometers? I'll try. The Soviet fighters make another pass, more determined this time. A burst of cannon fire punches through Rudel's right wing, tearing a jagged hole in the fabric-covered control surface. The Stuka shudders, but remains controllable. Through the bullet hole in his canopy, Rudel catches a glimpse of the lead Yak pilot, a fleeting impression of a goggled face intent on its target. Man against man, machine against machine, ideology against ideology. The personal reality of war distilled to its essence. Low on ammunition, Henschel reports, his voice steady despite the strain. Maybe 200 rounds left. Before Rudel can respond, an explosion rocks the formation, not Miller's aircraft, one of their escorts. Stuka 5 spirals downward, trailing flame and black smoke. No parachutes appear. The loss hits Rudel like a physical blow. Lieutenant Krause, 22 years old, on his 17th mission. Another name, another letter to write. But grief must wait. Survival demands full attention. Miller, change heading 10 degrees north. Rudel orders, there's a line of clouds we can use for cover. The remaining Stukas alter course, the damaged aircraft struggling to maintain formation. The Soviet fighters continue to press their attack, but with less coordination now, perhaps wary of being drawn too far from their own lines. Through skill and discipline, the German pilots work their way toward the cloud bank. Rudel flies close beside Miller's struggling aircraft, watching its faltering engine with professional concern. The young pilot is handling the damaged Stuka well, compensating for its compromised aerodynamics with subtle control adjustments. 5 kilometers to cloud cover, Rudel announces. Hold together. The bullet hole in his canopy seems to mock the word. Hold together. A pilot's prayer for his aircraft, a commander's for his men, a nation's for itself. With each mission, the prayer becomes harder to answer. A final burst of Soviet machine gun fire rakes across Rudel's aircraft as they reach the cloud's edge. Fresh impacts pepper the fuselage, but none strike anything vital. Then the grey mist envelops them, a momentary sanctuary from pursuit. We've lost them for now, Henschel confirms, scanning the cloud-filtered sky behind them. Rudel nods, though his gunner can't see the gesture. Miller, status, still airborne, comes the tense reply. Oil dropping, don't think we'll make the field. Prepare for emergency landing, Rudel instructs. We'll stay with you. The mechanic's toolbox sits open on the wing of Rudel's Stuka, its contents meticulously organized despite the chaos of the airfield. Wrenches, pliers, screwdrivers, each with its designated place, a small island of order in a war increasingly defined by disorder. Feldwebel Schmidt, the chief mechanic, selects tools with practiced efficiency as he assesses the damage to Rudel's aircraft. How bad? Rudel asks, standing beside the wing, still in his flight gear. The landing had been rougher than usual, the damaged control surfaces making the aircraft buck and shudder on approach. Schmidt runs a calloused hand along the bullet-riddled aileron. Could be worse, Herr Oberst. The control cables are intact. Structure damage is superficial. He taps the wing with his knuckle. These old birds can take punishment. Across the airfield, medical personnel are attending to Lieutenant Müller, whose emergency landing had been less successful. His Stuka sits at an awkward angle at the runway's edge. One landing gear collapsed, propeller bent from striking the ground. The pilot himself had emerged with only minor injuries, a miracle considering the state of his aircraft. What about Müller's Stuka? Rudel asks. Schmidt shakes his head. Beyond our capabilities here, we might salvage some parts, but she won't fly again without major reconstruction. Left unspoken is the reality. There won't be reconstruction. The aircraft is a loss, another small subtraction from Germany's dwindling resources. Hauptmann Becker approaches, clipboard in hand. Intelligence wants your report immediately, Oberst Rudel. Command is especially interested in the tank column's composition. Rudel nods, though his preference would be to stay with his aircraft while Schmidt works. The bond between pilot and machine is practical as much as sentimental. His life depends on the quality of these repairs. I'll be there shortly, he tells Becker, then turns back to Schmidt. How long before she's ready to fly again? The mechanic considers. 3 hours minimum. The cannon mounting needs alignment after that hit you took. I have another mission scheduled this afternoon. She'll be ready, Schmidt promises, already turning back to his work, selecting a wrench from his toolbox. The debriefing room is stuffy and overcrowded. Diligence officers pepper the returning pilots with questions about Soviet positions, equipment, numbers. Rudel delivers his observations with clinical precision. 8 tanks destroyed, several more damaged, approximately a company of infantry accompanying the armor. Coordinates, headings, estimated speeds. Major Schroeder from intelligence interrupts. You're certain they were T-34 85s, not the older model? Certain, Rudel confirms. The longer barrel on the 85mm gun is distinctive from the air. They're upgrading their tank divisions faster than our report suggested. Schroeder makes a note, his expression grim. The T-34-85 is more than a match for most German tanks now. The technological edge that had once favored the Wehrmacht continues to erode, and the fighters that engaged you. Yakgan's the newer variant with the heavier cannon. At least 6 of them, possibly part of a larger group. We confirmed 1 damaged, perhaps destroyed. The questioning continues for nearly an hour, every detail extracted and recorded. The loss of Lieutenant Krauss is noted with bureaucratic efficiency, one more statistic in a war that has long since ceased to count individual sacrifices. As the debriefing concludes, Colonel Weber pulls Rudel aside. Your diversion to protect Miller was unauthorized. You endangered 2 additional aircraft to save 1. Rudel meets the colonel's gaze directly. I would do the same again. That's not the point. We can't afford to lose our best pilots on rescue missions. Your primary responsibility was to the mission objective. My responsibility was to my men and my mission, in that order, Rudel responds, an edge entering his voice. Lieutenant Miller is alive and will fly again. The mission objectives were achieved. 8 tanks destroyed, Soviet advance delayed. Weber's jaw tightens, but he doesn't pursue the argument. They both know Rudel's status protects him from serious reprimand. The Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds carries a certain immunity, especially when worn by a pilot with Rudel's record. Outside, the airfield continues its constant activity. Ground crews refuel aircraft, armament specialists reload cannon and machine guns, mechanics repair battle damage. The choreography of war preparation unfolds with practiced efficiency, each man knowing his role in the complex machine. Rudel spots Henschel chatting with other rear gunners near the mess hall, sharing cigarettes and comparing observations from the morning's mission. The camaraderie is visible even at a distance, the special bond formed by sharing mortal danger. Approaching them, Rudel notices how the conversation pauses briefly at his arrival, then resumes, a mark of respect, but not discomfort. He has worked hard to maintain this balance with his men, to be their commander without becoming distant. How's the aircraft, sir? Henschel asks, offering Rudel a cigarette, which he declines with a shake of his head. Schmidt says 3 hours. We'll be ready for the afternoon mission. The gunners exchange glances. Everyone knows that maintenance estimates have become increasingly optimistic as parts grow scarcer. 3 hours might mean 4 or 5. Müller was asking for you, one of the gunners mentions. Said he owes you a bottle of schnapps, if such a thing still exists in Russia. A ghost of a smile touches Rudel's face. Tell him to save it. We may need it before this war is over. The response draws subdued laughter, the gallows humor of men living on borrowed time. As the conversation turns to technical details of the morning's engagement, Rudel's thoughts drift back to his aircraft, where Schmidt's tools are working their subtle magic, preparing man and machine for yet another dance with mortality. The intelligence report lies open on the mess hall table, its pages marked with red stamps declaring for officier, for officers only. Rudel scans the document while mechanically consuming his midday meal. The report contains the unvarnished truth rarely shared with ordinary soldiers. Fuel reserves critically low, ammunition production falling behind consumption rates, reinforcements inadequate to replace losses. Most concerning is the section detailing Soviet production figures, a seemingly endless supply of tanks, aircraft, and artillery rolling off assembly lines safely beyond the Luftwaffe's reach. Mind if I join you? Major Sommer slides onto the bench across from Rudel, his own tray bearing the same sparse offerings, a thin soup, dark bread, a small portion of sausage. Rudel nods, closing the intelligence report. Anything new from the other fronts? Sommer glances around before answering, his voice low. The situation in the south continues to deteriorate. Army Group South has been pushed back another 20 kilometers in the past week, and the promised reinforcements delayed again. Sommer tears his bread in half with a deliberate motion. There's talk of pulling another division from France to shore up the line near Kiev. They eat in silence for a moment, both men contemplating the implication. Every seasoned officer knows the pattern now. Resources stretched thinner, promises of support that never fully materialize, defensive lines drawn ever closer to Germany's borders. Your flying today was exceptional, even by your standards, Sommer says, changing the subject. That rescue of Müller's aircraft. Weber was furious, but the men were impressed. Rudel shrugs slightly. Weber wouldn't have done differently in my position, perhaps not 10 months ago. Now, Sommer leaves the thought unfinished. The mess hall buzzes with subdued conversation. Pilots and ground crew move through the serving line accepting their rations without complaint. Faces show the strain of continuous operations, dark circles under eyes, the slight hollowness of cheeks that comes from months of inadequate rest and insufficient food. We have a new arrival, Sommer mentions, nodding toward a young officer, sitting alone at the end of a table. Lieutenant Hoffmann, transferred from training command. First combat assignment. Rudel studies the newcomer. Blonde hair cut regulation short, uniform still bearing the crisp lines of recent issue rather than the weathered look of frontline service. The lieutenant's eyes hold the eager alertness of youth, not yet tempered by combat experience. How many flight hours? 200, mostly in training aircraft. 40 in the Ju-87, all in good weather. Rudel suppresses a grimace. Training programs have been shortened repeatedly as losses mount. New pilots arrive with increasingly minimal preparation, their survival prospects diminishing with each reduction in training time. Assign him as my wingman for the afternoon mission, Rudel decides. I'll keep him close. Sommer nods, understanding the unspoken reasoning. The rookie's best chance lies in flying beside the squadron's most experienced pilot. Under Rudel's wing, literally and figuratively, the young lieutenant might survive long enough to develop the skills combat demands. Their conversation is interrupted as the mess hall door bangs open. A signals officer hurries in, scanning the room until he spots Rudel. His expression conveys urgency before he speaks a word. Oberst Rudel, he calls, approaching rapidly. New intelligence from the forward observation posts. The Soviet armor column is moving again, advancing faster than expected. They've bypassed our defensive positions at Brovary. Rudel rises immediately. When? Report came in 10 minutes ago. Command wants all available aircraft airborne as soon as possible. Around the mess hall, other pilots are already standing, meals abandoned, half-eaten. The atmosphere shifts palpably from momentary rest to focused preparation for combat. Tell Schmidt to prioritize my aircraft, Rudel instructs Sommer, and have someone brief Hoffmann immediately, make sure he understands the formation protocols. As Sommer hurries away, Rudel takes a final sip of the lukewarm coffee substitute that has become standard issue. His gaze falls on the intelligence report still on the table. The stark numbers and projections it contains stand in sharp contrast to the confident pronouncements in official communications. The gap between proclaimed certainty and operational reality grows wider each month. He tucks the report into his jacket pocket. Such documents aren't meant to leave the briefing rooms, but Rudel has found that reviewing them in quiet moments helps him prepare mentally for what lies ahead. Understanding the broader strategic picture, however grim, allows him to make better tactical decisions in the chaos of combat. Outside, the winter sun hangs low in the sky despite the midday hour. Its pale light does little to soften the stark landscape of the airfield, muddy ground frozen into rutted hardness, aircraft dispersed in protective revetments, smoke from distant artillery creating a hazy smudge along the horizon. Lieutenant Hoffman emerges from a nearby building, struggling slightly with his flight gear. Seeing Rudel, the young officer straightens to attention, eyes bright with barely contained excitement and nervousness. "Oberst Rudel, sir. Major Summer informed me I'll be flying as your wingman." Rudel studies the lieutenant for a moment. "First combat mission, Hoffman?" "Yes, sir." "I'm ready, sir." The eagerness in the young man's voice stirs something between sympathy and resignation in Rudel. He remembers his own first combat sortie, the same certainty, the same ignorance of what actually awaited in the skies. "Stay close to my wing," Rudel instructs, his tone neutral but firm. "Maintain your position no matter what happens. If we encounter fighters, focus on flying your aircraft. Your rear gunner will handle defense." "Questions?" "No, sir. I won't let you down." Rudel nods, hoping the confidence isn't misplaced. "Let's go then. We have tanks to kill." The binoculars hang heavily around Rudel's neck as he stands at the edge of the airfield, scanning the horizon with practiced precision. German-made Zeiss 10x50s, their lenses meticulously clean despite the omnipresent dust and grime of the Eastern Front. Through them he can discern details invisible to the naked eye. The distant flash of artillery, the subtle dust clouds raised by vehicle movements, the changing patterns of enemy air patrols. Inside the operations tent, a hasty planning session is underway. A reconnaissance aircraft returned 20 minutes ago with fresh photographs of the Soviet advance, and now commanders huddle around a map table plotting the afternoon mission. "They've split their armor into 2 columns, explains Captain Weiss, the reconnaissance pilot. His finger traces routes on the large-scale map. "Main force continuing along the highway here. Second, smaller group moving through this valley, possibly attempting to flank our defensive position at this crossroads." Colonel Weber studies the map with a furrowed brow. "Priorities, high command wants the main column hit first." Major Schroeder interjects. "They're concerned about a breakthrough to Berezhany." Rudel lowers his binoculars and rejoins the group. "The main column will be heavily defended. Anti-aircraft emplacements here, here, and likely here." He marks positions on the map with a grease pencil. "We saw their flak batteries moving up this morning. Nevertheless, those are our orders," Weber says firmly. Rudel studies the reconnaissance photographs spread alongside the map. Black and white images show the Soviet tanks in column formation, but his experienced eye catches details others might miss: the spacing between vehicles, the positioning of supporting elements, the natural bottlenecks in the terrain ahead of their advance. "There's another approach," he says finally. "The secondary column is moving through terrain that will channel them through this narrow valley. If we hit them here," his pencil circles a tight passage between hillsides, "we could block the entire valley with disabled vehicles. Their flanking maneuver would be stopped, forcing them to redirect to the main route." Weber frowns. "That doesn't address the primary threat." "It does if we time it correctly," Rudel counters. "Block the valley first, then immediately strike the main column here, where the road crosses this river. The bridge is a natural choke point. Hit it while tanks are crossing, and we create 2 problems for them simultaneously." The assembled officers consider the alternative strategy. Rudel can see the reluctance in Weber's expression, not because the plan lacks merit, but because it deviates from explicit orders. The colonel has become increasingly rigid as the war situation deteriorates, adhering to command directives with literal precision, regardless of changing circumstances on the ground. It's more complex than a direct assault, Weber objects. More can go wrong, and more can go right, Rudel responds. We hit them where they don't expect it, then where they do expect it, but can't maneuver. We maximize damage while minimizing our exposure to their anti-aircraft defenses. Major Sommer nods slowly. The element of surprise favors Oberstrudel's approach. The Soviets will have concentrated their air defenses around the main column. A tense silence follows. The planning room hierarchy is clear. Weber commands. Others advise. Yet Rudel's combat record and tactical instincts have earned him unusual latitude, even as a subordinate officer. Weber's internal struggle plays across his features. Finally he sighs. Very well. We'll implement Oberstrudel's plan, but he adds, fixing Rudel with a stern gaze. Precision timing is essential. If the secondary strike isn't executed immediately after the valley is blocked, the entire strategy fails. I understand, Herr Oberstrudel acknowledges. The planning continues with renewed energy, officers calculating fuel loads, ammunition requirements, formation compositions. Rudel steps back from the table, raising his binoculars again to study the eastern sky. Weather conditions remain marginal, scattered clouds at 800 meters, visibility approximately 5 kilometers, winds gusting from the northeast. Not ideal, but manageable for experienced pilots. His thoughts turn to Lieutenant Hoffman, the new pilot who will fly as his wingman. The young officer's training has prepared him for textbook conditions and scenarios, not the chaotic reality of combat, where plans change mid-mission and split-second decisions determine survival. Keeping Hoffman alive while executing a complex attack plan adds another layer of challenge. Through his binoculars, Rudel notices mechanics swarming around his Stuka, working frantically to complete repairs from the morning's damage. Schmidt, the chief mechanic, supervises with the intensity of a conductor leading an orchestra, directing each specialist with precise gestures. The aircraft's survival, and by extension Rudel's, depends on their skill and thoroughness. Lowering the binoculars, he returns to the map table, where final assignments are being made. 6 aircraft will attack the valley under Sommer's leadership. Rudel will lead the main strike force against the bridge with 7 Stukas, including the inexperienced Hoffman. We launch in 40 minutes, Weber announces, checking his watch. Briefing your squadron leaders immediately. As the officers disperse to their assignments, Rudel feels the familiar tightening in his chest, not fear exactly, but the body's recognition of approaching danger. After more than 2,000 combat missions, the sensation is almost comforting in its familiarity, a physiological preparation for what lies ahead. He reflexively adjusts the binoculars hanging around his neck. Through these lenses, he has witnessed countless battles unfold, observed the movements that signal victory or defeat, watched comrades' aircraft fall in flames. They represent his perspective on the war, focused, detailed, yet limited to what lies within their field of view, never capturing the complete picture. The engine part replacement sits in a wooden crate beside Rudel's Stuka, its metal housing still coated with preservative grease. The part represents more than just a mechanical component. It embodies the increasingly precarious supply chain that keeps the Luftwaffe operational. Months ago, such parts arrived in bulk shipments. Now they come individually, each one logged and tracked like precious gems. We got lucky, Schmidt explains as his team works to install the replacement oil pump. Last one in the sector. Had to pull strings with Supply Corps to get it here today. Rudel nods, understanding the unspoken message. If his Stuka takes similar damage in the afternoon mission, it might be grounded indefinitely. The war of attrition extends beyond men to machines, each irreplaceable loss tilting the balance further. Pre-flight preparations proceed with practiced efficiency despite the compressed timeline. Armament crews reload the 37mm cannon under the Stuka's wing, each shell carefully inspected before being placed in the magazine. Fuel trucks top off tanks with the increasingly precious aviation gasoline. Rudel performs his own inspection, methodically checking every control surface, every vital system. Lieutenant Hoffman watches this ritual with barely concealed impatience, eager for his first combat sortie. His Stuka sits adjacent to Rudel's, its pristine condition contrasting with the weathered appearance of the veteran aircraft. "Sir," Hoffman approaches, flight gear already donned. "Is there anything specific I should know about the mission parameters?" Rudel considers the young officer. Enthusiasm without experience is a dangerous combination in combat. "Yes. When we reach the target area, focus on flying your aircraft first, targeting second. Many new pilots become fixated on their bomb site and forget to maintain proper airspeed and altitude." "Yes, I've studied your tactics extensively at flight school. Theory differs from application," Rudel cautions. "Today, stay high on your first attack run. Observe before attempting low-altitude approaches." Disappointment flickers across Hoffman's face. Like many new pilots, he has arrived at the front, eager to prove himself, to accumulate victories and decorations. He hasn't yet learned that survival itself is the primary victory in war. The mission briefing is concise, conducted beside the aircraft, rather than in the formal setting of the operations room. Time constraints necessitate abbreviation. Maps are consulted, timing coordinated, emergency procedures reviewed. Every pilot knows that plans rarely survive contact with the enemy, but the framework provides essential structure. "Questions," Rudel concludes, scanning the faces of his squadron. Silence answers him. These men have flown together through countless missions. They understand the unspoken elements of combat coordination as intimately as the mechanical operation of their aircraft. "Then, to your planes. We launch in 10 minutes. The ritual of departure unfolds with solemn efficiency. Pilots perform final checks. Gunners test the movement of their weapons. Ground crew make last-minute adjustments. Despite the routine nature of these actions, a certain gravity permeates the proceedings. Each departure might be the last." Rudel climbs into his cockpit, settling into the familiar seat that has cradled him through thousands of hours of flight. The leather is worn smooth in places, molded to his body's contour. Henschel takes his position in the rear cockpit, their cooperation so long-standing that they communicate as much through gesture and intuition as through the aircraft's intercom. The Stuka's engine coughs, then roars to life as the starter engages. Vibration travels through the airframe, a mechanical pulse that Rudel's body interprets instinctively. The sound is distinctive, a throaty rumble with harmonic undertones that experienced pilots can read like a medical doctor interpreting a heartbeat. Today the engine sounds healthy, the replacement oil pump performing its function properly. Across the airfield, other Stukas start their engines in sequence. The collective sound builds to a thunderous chorus, drowning out all normal conversation. Ground crew move with practiced precision, removing chocks, disconnecting external power, giving final thumbs-up signals to pilots. Rudel advances his throttle, feeling the aircraft strain against the brakes. A quick glance confirms that Hoffman is following the procedure correctly in his adjacent Stuka. The young lieutenant's posture shows tension, his movements slightly too deliberate, lacking the unconscious fluidity that comes with experience. The radio crackles with the control tower's transmission. Stuka Kokchina cleared for takeoff, winds 040 at 15 knots. Rudel releases the brakes and his aircraft begins to roll forward, gathering speed down the packed dirt runway. The familiar sensations follow in sequence, the initial bumping over uneven ground smoothing as the tail lifts, the momentary heaviness as the aircraft approaches, flying speed, then the subtle lightening as the wheels leave the earth. Climbing steadily, Rudel banks slightly to allow the following aircraft to join formation. One by one, the Stukas take to the air, forming the practiced attack pattern. Through his canopy, Rudel confirms each aircraft's position, noting with approval that Hoffman has maintained proper spacing and altitude. The overcast sky swallows them as they ascend through scattered clouds. Visibility reduces to fleeting glimpses of adjacent aircraft, ghostly shapes appearing and disappearing in the vapor. Radio discipline becomes essential now, each pilot reporting position and status in clipped, precise language. 2,000 meters, Rudel announces as they break through the cloud layer into clear air above. Level off and proceed to checkpoint Alpha. Below them the clouds create a false horizon, a deceptive floor of cotton white that conceals the war-torn landscape. For a brief moment, the formation exists in a realm of pristine isolation, separate from the conflict below. Then reality reasserts itself as Rudel banks the formation eastward, toward the target area, where Soviet armor continues its advance. The mission has begun in textbook fashion, but experience has taught Rudel that such perfection rarely lasts. Somewhere ahead, the enemy waits with its own plans and countermeasures. The replacement part in his engine will soon face its ultimate test, not on a mechanic's bench, but in the crucible of combat, where theory meets reality and only results matter. The field medical kit sits open on the table beside the hospital cot, its contents meticulously arranged: bandages, morphine ampules, sulfur powder, surgical instruments. Once pristine white, the canvas case now bears the inevitable stains of its purpose, each discoloration representing a life saved or lost. The medical orderly selects items with practiced efficiency, tending to a pilot's shrapnel wound. Rudel stands at the entrance to the field hospital, still in his flight gear, the smell of aviation fuel clinging to him. The familiar odors of the medical facility, antiseptic, blood, fear, create a jarring contrast. The afternoon mission has concluded, successful by tactical standards, but costly in human terms. He's conscious, but sedated. The doctor informs Rudel, leading him toward a cot in the corner, took shrapnel in the right shoulder and leg. No vital organs damaged. He's fortunate. Lieutenant Weber lies pale against the rough sheets, his flight jacket cut away to access his wounds. Despite the morphine, pain etches lines around his mouth. Recognition flickers in his eyes as Rudel approaches. Herr Oberst, Weber acknowledges, his voice thin but determined. "You flew well today," Rudel tells him, taking a seat on the wooden stool beside the cot. "Your attack run on the bridge was perfectly executed." A ghost of a smile touches Weber's lips. "Not perfectly. I didn't see the flak position until too late. Neither did reconnaissance. It was well camouflaged. Around them the field hospital functions with grim efficiency. Medical personnel move between cots, addressing the most critical cases first, applying the brutal triage mathematics of wartime medicine. Most patients are infantry, the grinding conflict on the ground, producing casualties at a far higher rate than air operations. Did we stop them? Weber asks, the question reflecting the purpose that drives men to risk their lives over enemy territory. Yes, the valley is blocked with disabled vehicles. The bridge is severely damaged. Their advance has been disrupted. Rudel delivers the assessment with factual precision, neither embellishing nor diminishing the accomplishment. Your contribution was significant. Weber nods slightly, the validation seeming to ease his pain momentarily. And the squadron? I heard we lost aircraft. Rudel hesitates. The young pilot doesn't need additional burden while fighting his own physical battle. Yet military culture demands honesty among comrades. 2 Stukas lost, Neumann and Hoffmann. Weber's face tightens. Hoffmann? The new lieutenant? Yes. Anti-aircraft fire during his second attack run. He flew too low, against instructions. Rudel keeps his voice neutral, suppressing the frustration and regret. The young pilot had been eager to prove himself, to emulate the squadron's renowned low-altitude attack techniques without the experience to execute them properly. His enthusiasm had become his undoing. And his gunner, also lost. The weight of this information settles between them. 2 more names added to the squadron's memorial list. 2 more letters to write to families in Germany. The constant subtraction that defines this war of attrition. A medical orderly approaches, carrying fresh bandages. I need to change his dressings, Herr Oberst. Rudel nods, rising from the stool. I'll return tomorrow, Weber. The doctor says you'll be evacuated to the main hospital at Lviv once you're stabilized. Sir Weber calls as Rudel turns to leave. I'd rather stay with the squadron if possible. The wound isn't that serious. The request doesn't surprise Rudel. The bond between men who face death together creates a powerful gravity, pulling them back to their units even when logic dictates otherwise. We'll see what the medical officers decide. Rest now. Outside the hospital tent, the airfield continues its relentless rhythm. Ground crews service returning aircraft, intelligence officers debrief pilots, mechanics assess battle damage. The constant cycle of preparation, execution and recovery that defines frontline air operations. Major Sommer intercepts Rudel as he walks back toward the operations building. Command is on the line. They want a personal report on the mission outcome. Tell them I'll be there momentarily. There's more, Sommer adds, his expression conveying the significance. New orders coming through, high priority. Rudel pauses, studying his colleague's face. Another mission? Today? It appears so. The breakthrough we disrupted was apparently just a feint. Main Soviet force is advancing further north. They've broken through the 17th Infantry's position. The implications are immediately clear. The afternoon's success, bought with German blood and aviation fuel, may have been directed at a secondary threat while the primary danger developed elsewhere. It's a common Soviet tactic, using Germany's dwindling resources against itself, forcing responses to diversion reactions while main efforts proceed elsewhere. How soon? Rudel asks. Briefing in 30 minutes. They're requesting all operational aircraft. Rudel glances back at the hospital tent, thinking of Weber and the others recovering inside. Then his gaze shifts to the maintenance area, where ground crews are already refueling and rearming the surviving Stukas. The men are visibly exhausted, having worked continuously since before dawn. The aircraft themselves show the accumulated wear of repeated combat sorties, oil streaks on fuselages, patched control surfaces, makeshift repairs to non-critical damage. I'll be there, he confirmed. As Sommer hurries away, Rudel remains momentarily stationary, a rare stillness in his otherwise perpetual motion. 3 missions in a single day pushes the limits of both men and machine. The winter day is already waning, meaning the third sortie would likely conclude in darkness, adding another layer of danger to an already hazardous operation. His hand brushes the knight's cross at his throat, not a gesture of pride, but an unconscious habit, developed through years of command. The decoration represents not personal glory but responsibility for his men, his mission, his country. Even a strategic reality increasingly suggests a war that cannot be won. Tactical obligations remain absolute. The field medical kit in the hospital tent behind him and the aircraft awaiting him ahead represent the 2 constants of his existence now, the inevitable damage of war and the machinery that inflicts it. Between them he moves with the mechanical precision that has become his defining characteristic, compartmentalizing grief and fatigue, focusing solely on the next objective. The hastily written orders lie on the briefing room table, their hurried penmanship and multiple corrections betraying the urgency of their creation. Unlike the meticulous typed directives of earlier war years, these handwritten commands reflect the increasing chaos of a military machine under relentless pressure. Smudged carbon copies replace the crisp duplicates once standard for operational documents. Colonel Weber paces the front of the room as pilots assemble for the emergency briefing. The afternoon light filtering through the windows has taken on the amber quality of approaching sunset, casting long shadows across the maps and intelligence photographs. Gentlemen, our situation has changed significantly. Weber begins without preamble. Soviet forces have achieved a breakthrough near Khorasan, approximately 80 kilometers northeast of our position. The 17th Infantry Division is in danger of encirclement. A large-scale map illuminates the tactical crisis. Red arrows indicate Soviet advances, the most alarming penetration forming a salient 12 kilometers deep into German lines. Blue symbols show the increasingly isolated German defensive positions. The immediate threat is this armored spearhead. Weber continues, indicating the most advanced Soviet element. They've bypassed our anti-tank defenses by crossing terrain previously considered impassable for heavy vehicles. Major Kleinmann, from intelligence, steps forward. We believe they're using captured German half-tracks to tow their tanks across the marshy areas. Once across, they're moving rapidly along this ridgeline toward the critical road junction at Malin. Rudel studies the map intently, calculating distances, fuel requirements, and potential anti-aircraft defenses. The mission parameters are challenging: a long approach flight, limited daylight remaining, an enemy aware of their likely response. If they secure this junction, Weber explains, the entire northern sector of our front becomes untenable. 3 divisions would be cut off from their supply lines. The gravity of the situation settles over the assembled pilots. This isn't a routine interdiction mission, but a desperate attempt to avert a strategic disaster. Command has requested immediate air support to slow their advance until reserves can be repositioned, Weber concludes. All available aircraft are being committed. How many operational Stukas do we have? Rudel asks, the practical question cutting through the strategic overview. The maintenance officer consults his clipboard. 7 aircraft fully operational, 3 more with minor damage that could be ready within 2 hours. We don't have 2 hours, Weber states flatly. We launch with the 7. Rudel performs quick mental calculations. 7 aircraft, each with one 500 kilogear bomb and their cannon against what intelligence suggests might be 40 or more tanks. With infantry support. The mathematics is grimly unfavorable. What about fuel reserves? He asks. A brief silence follows. The uncomfortable pause that precedes unwelcome news. Sufficient for this mission. The logistics officer finally answers. But it will deplete our emergency reserve. There won't be enough for operations tomorrow unless resupply arrives overnight. Another piece of the larger strategic puzzle becomes clear. They're being asked to expend their final operational resources on a desperate gamble to prevent immediate disaster, potentially at the cost of any capability tomorrow. Weather conditions. Rudel continues his methodical assessment. Deteriorating, responds the meteorological officer. Cloud ceiling dropping to 600 meters near the target area. Visibility approximately 3 kilometers. Winds increasing from the northeast. Weber interrupts the questioning. I understand your concerns, Oberst Rudel, but the orders are clear. This mission has highest priority from Army Group headquarters. A subtle tension fills the room. Every pilot present understands what Weber doesn't explicitly state, that even their best effort might prove insufficient, that they're being asked to risk everything for a delaying action rather than a decisive blow. I'll lead the mission, Rudel states simply. The declaration isn't arrogance, but practicality. His experience and skill give the operation its best chance of success, however marginal. Relief flickers across Weber's face. Despite their occasional tactical disagreements, Rudel's willingness to undertake the most dangerous missions remains unquestioned. The remaining squadron pilots are exhausted. Rudel continues. I recommend taking only volunteers for this sortie. That's not procedure. Weber begins. 3 missions in 1 day exceeds normal operational parameters. Rudel counters. Fatigue compromises effectiveness and increases casualties. I need pilots who are confident in their ability to perform under these conditions. A silent standoff follows. Military protocol wrestling with battlefield reality. Finally, Weber nods curtly. Very well. Volunteers only, but I expect sufficient personnel will step forward. He needn't have worried. Every pilot in the room raises a hand, despite the evident exhaustion on their faces. The gesture transcends duty or obedience. It emerges from the complex brotherhood formed in combat, where standing aside while comrades face danger becomes unthinkable. I'll take Becker, Hahn, Richter, and Steiner, Rudel decides, selecting the most experienced pilots among them. The others remain in reserve. The briefing continues with accelerated intensity. Intelligence officers detail known enemy anti-aircraft positions. Operations staff coordinate with forward artillery observers who will mark target positions with colored smoke. Maintenance personnel report on ammunition loads and aircraft readiness. Throughout these discussions, Rudel's attention repeatedly returns to the hastily written orders on the table. Their physical form embodies the degradation of the once formidable German war machine, improvisation, replacing planning, reaction supplanting strategy, desperation superseding confidence. "We launch in 20 minutes, Weber announces, checking his watch. "God be with you all." As the briefing disperses, Rudel remains momentarily at the map table, committing key terrain features to memory. Henschel, his loyal rear gunner, approaches quietly. "Third mission today," he observes neutrally, against fresh opposition. Rudel meets his gaze. "You don't have to come. I can take another gunner." A smile flickers across Henschel's weathered face. After 2,000 sorties together, what would people say? The simple exchange conceals deeper currents. Both men understand the statistical improbability of surviving this war, the narrowing odds with each additional mission. Yet they continue, driven by a complicated mixture of duty, habit, and the peculiar fatalism that sustained combat engendered. Outside, ground crews are already preparing the 7 operational Stukas, working with desperate haste as the sun sinks lower toward the western horizon. The day that began in routine now rushes toward an uncertain conclusion, the hastily written orders setting in motion events that will determine whether disaster can be averted or merely postponed. The sunset-lit horizon stretches before Rudel's aircraft, a canvas of crimson and gold that belies the violence unfolding beneath it. The beauty seems almost sacrilegious against the backdrop of war, nature's indifferent splendor, continuing regardless of human conflict. Through his canopy, the fading light creates a momentary illusion of peace that experience tells him is merely atmospheric deception. Formation tightening up, Henschel reports from the rear cockpit. "All aircraft in position." Rudel acknowledges with a slight nod, though his gunner can't see the gesture. The 5 Stukas fly in a loose V formation, maintaining separation for defensive flexibility while preserving their collective striking power. Each aircraft represents the culmination of years of engineering, months of construction, weeks of maintenance, all focused into instruments of destruction that will discharge their purpose in mere seconds over the target. The radio crackles with a transmission from the forward artillery observer. "Stuka formation, this is ground guide. Soviet column advancing along Route 7. Will mark the lead elements with red smoke when you approach." "Acknowledged ground guide," Rudel responds. Estimated time to target area 8 minutes. The fading daylight complicates their mission. Stukas were designed for precision daylight attacks, their dive-bombing technique requiring clear visual identification of targets. The gathering dusk reduces contrast, blurs details, shrouds defensive positions until they reveal themselves through muzzle flashes. "Check your gun, Henschel. We may have visitors." Rudel has spotted tiny specks above and to the east, likely Soviet fighters patrolling their forward areas. Whether they've seen the German formation yet remains unclear. "Already on it," comes the calm reply. The twin barrels of the rear-facing machine guns swivel slightly as Henschel tests their movement. Full ammunition load, guns responsive. Below them the landscape darkens as the sun dips lower. The familiar geography of the Eastern Front unfolds. Patched forests, winding rivers, scattered villages connected by roads that appear deceptively peaceful from altitude. Only occasionally does evidence of war become visible, the blackened scar of a burned village, the geometric patterns of trench lines, the fresh cratering of artillery bombardment. 5 minutes to target, Rudel announces to his squadron. Arm weapon system. Each pilot acknowledges in turn, their voices betraying varying degrees of fatigue. This third mission has pushed beyond normal endurance, testing the limits of human alertness in an environment where a moment's inattention can prove fatal. Bandits confirmed. Henschel reports tense. Yak 9s, 4 o'clock high. approximately 5 kilometers. Maintain course, Rudel instructs the formation. We strike the target first. Evasive actions only if directly engaged. The calculus is simple but brutal. Their bombs must reach the Soviet armor column. The mission's success outweighs the survival of any individual aircraft, including his own. If the fighters attack before they reach the target, they'll defend themselves while continuing toward the objective. Their duty is clear regardless of the cost. Ground guide to Stuka leader. The radio crackles again. Soviet column has reached the Malin crossroads, 30-plus vehicles moving west. Heavy tanks in the lead. Can you mark the position? Rudel requests. Affirmative. Red smoke, deploying now. Straining his eyes against the fading light, Rudel searches for the telltale crimson plume. The target area lies ahead, partially obscured by low-hanging clouds that have moved in with the approaching evening. I have visual on the smoke, Lieutenant Becker reports from the aircraft, to Rudel's right. 2 o'clock, approximately 4 kilometers. Rudel adjusts his course slightly, finally spotting the marker. Through breaks in the cloud layer, he can make out the Soviet column, a dark serpent of vehicles stretching along the pale ribbon of the road. The tanks at the front have already reached the critical junction, beginning their turn toward the vulnerable German flank. We have minutes, not hours, to disrupt this advance, he thinks quickly, formulating his attack plan. The fading light actually offers one advantage. The Soviet anti-aircraft gunners will have difficulty tracking the Stukas against the darkening sky until they begin their dives. Attack formation, he orders. I'll take the lead elements. Becker and Hahn focus on vehicles at the crossroads itself. Richter and Steiner target the following segment of the column. Maintain 8-second intervals between dives. As the formation spreads into attack position, the Soviet fighters finally commit to an intercept course. Rudel can see them banking sharply, descending rapidly to engage the German aircraft before they can reach their targets. Fighters closing fast. Henschel warned, 2 minutes to intercept at current speeds. It will be a race. The Stukas must begin their attack runs before the faster Soviet aircraft can disrupt their formation. Once committed to a dive, the German pilots become dangerously vulnerable, their attention necessarily focused on target acquisition rather than defensive maneuvering. Begin attack sequence, Rudel commands, pushing his aircraft into a steep dive toward the lead Soviet tank. The Stuka responds instantly, nose dropping, speed building rapidly as gravity adds its force to the engine's thrust. The signature howl of the dive brakes fills the cockpit, a psychological weapon that has terrified ground troops since the early days of the war. The sound centers Rudel, triggering the combat mindset honed through thousands of similar dives. The world narrows to the targeting site, the altimeter, and the rapidly approaching Soviet tank. Everything else, the pursuing fighters, the fading light, the fatigue of 3 missions, falls away, replaced by absolute concentration on the task at hand. At 400 meters, he releases his bomb, feeling the aircraft lighten instantly as the 500-kilogram explosive separates from the fuselage. Without waiting to confirm the hit, Rudel pulls sharply out of the dive, the G-forces pressing him hard into his seat as the Stuka levels out barely 50 meters above the ground. Direct hit, Henschel shouts over the intercom. Lead tank destroyed. Secondary explosions. Through his side window, Rudel glimpses Becker's Stuka completing its own dive, bomb falling true toward the cluster of vehicles at the crossroads. Behind him, the remaining aircraft commence their attack sequence with precision born of training and experience. Then, the Soviet fighters arrive, cannon fire stitching the air around the vulnerable German aircraft. The battle transforms from a planned bombing run to a desperate struggle for survival, each pilot forced to balance mission completion against immediate threat. The night landing flares burst above the airfield, their harsh magnesium glare transforming darkness into unnatural day. The chemical light bathes everything in stark white, the aircraft, the ground, the faces of men, creating sharp shadows that seem to move with malevolent intent. Unlike the gentle illumination of dawn or the warm glow of sunset, this artificial brilliance offers no beauty, only functional visibility for pilots returning in near darkness. Rudel approaches the airfield at minimum safe altitude, his Stuka limping homeward. The right wing droops slightly from structural damage, the engine occasionally missing beats like an irregular heartbeat. Behind him, Henschel maintains vigilant watch, despite exhaustion, scanning for pursuers though they are now well within friendly territory. Runway in sight, Rudel reports over the radio. Request priority landing. Damage to control surfaces, fuel status critical. Cleared for immediate approach, responds the control tower. Emergency vehicles standing by. The other surviving aircraft circle above, waiting their turn. Of the 5 that departed, only 3 return, a statistical outcome better than many missions, but still representing a grievous loss of irreplaceable men and machines. Lining up for final approach, Rudel compensates for the aircraft's damaged controls, applying constant right rudder to maintain a straight course. The Stuka responds sluggishly, like an aging horse making a final effort for a trusted rider. Prepare for rough landing, he warns Hens. Always am, comes the laconic reply. The landing gear extends with reassuring mechanical thuds, but the right wheel appears slightly canted in Rudel's mirror. Possible damage to the strut. Another complication in an already precarious situation. The flares cast their harsh light across the airfield, creating a tunnel of visibility in the gathering night. Rudel focuses entirely on the approaching runway, hands moving instinctively across the controls, making continuous micro-adjustments to maintain a stable descent path. At 50 meters above the ground, a crosswind gust catches the damaged wing, pushing the aircraft dangerously off-center. Rudel counters immediately, increasing power momentarily while adjusting rudder pressure. The Stuka wallows, then steadies, continuing its descent toward the waiting Earth. The touchdown is harder than ideal, a controlled crash rather than a proper landing. The right gear collapses immediately, sending the aircraft skidding sideways in a shower of spark. Rudel cuts power and braces as the Stuka grinds to a halt at the runway's edge, its propeller blades bent from striking the ground. For a moment, silence replaces the familiar engine noise. Then activity erupts as emergency crews race toward the downed aircraft. Rudel performs the shutdown procedure mechanically, muscle memory overriding the disorientation of the rough landing. "You intact back there?" he calls to Hensch. "Nothing broken that wasn't already." The gunner responds, the gallows humor of veterans who have survived too many close calls to react with normal human alarm. Ground crew help them from the battered aircraft. Despite the urgency of the situation, Rudel pauses to rest a hand on the Stuka's fuselage, a gesture of acknowledgement for a machine that has brought him home once again, despite grievous wounds that might ground it permanently. The debriefing is abbreviated by necessity. Colonel Weber cuts through standard procedure, focusing only on essential outcomes. "The mission?" he asks simply, as Rudel enters the operations room. "Partially successful. We hit the lead elements of their column, destroyed at least 4 tanks and several support vehicles. The crossroads itself is blocked by burning wreckage. It will slow their advance, but not stop it." Weber nods, absorbing the tactical assessment. "Losses?" 2 aircraft confirmed. Richter and Steiner. Rudel delivers the information, with military precision, emotions firmly controlled. The time for proper grief will come later, if at all. No parachutes observed. The room absorbs this news with the stunned resignation of men who have witnessed too many similar reports. 2 more names added to the lengthening casualty lists, 2 more gaps in the squadron's diminishing ranks, 2 more letters to write to families in a homeland, increasingly threatened by the same enemy that claimed their sons. The Soviet fighters? Weber continues. Yak-9's newer variants, at least 8 of them possibly from their 103rd Guards Regiment. "They were waiting for us," not patrol aircraft that spotted us by chance. The implication hangs in the air. Soviet intelligence had anticipated their response to the breakthrough, positioning fighters specifically to intercept the German attack. Another small indicator of the war's shifting balance, the enemy's growing confidence and capability. As the debriefing continues, Rudel becomes aware of an officer waiting at the door, a signals corporal beside him. Their expressions suggest news of significance, but they wait respectfully for a natural pause in the proceedings. "What is it, Major Dieter?" Weber finally acknowledges them. "Sir, we've received priority communications from Army Group Headquarters," the Major responds, stepping forward to hand Weber a sealed envelope. "For your eyes only, but I was instructed to inform you that it concerns developments on the Central Front." Weber breaks the seal and reads quickly, his expression growing more grave with each line. When he looks up, his eyes settle on Rudel. The Russians have launched a major offensive across a 300-kilometer front. Initial reports indicate breakthrough at multiple points. Army Group Center is in full retreat. The announcement falls into the room like a bomb, its strategic implications immediately clear to every officer present. This is not merely another tactical setback, but potentially a war-altering development. If Army Group Center collapses, the entire Eastern Front becomes untenable. The High Command is ordering redeployment of all available air assets to support defensive operations. Weber continues, "We'll receive specific instructions by morning." Rudel absorbs this information with outward calm, though its significance registers fully. The strategic situation, already precarious, has deteriorated dramatically. While they were focusing on local tactical concerns, the gap between Germany's diminishing capabilities and the requirements of effective resistance grows wider by the day. "Get some rest," Weber tells the assembled officers. "Tomorrow we'll demand everything we have left to give." As the briefing disperses, Rudel stands momentarily motionless, combat fatigue finally asserting itself now that immediate duties are complete. 3 missions in a single day, each more desperate than the last. 9 hours of flight time, most under combat conditions. The accumulated strain manifests in subtle ways, a slight tremor in his hands, a dull headache pulsing behind his eyes, muscles aching from sustained tension. The harsh light of the landing flares has faded, replaced by the softer illumination of the operations room. In this gentler light, the exhaustion on men's faces becomes more apparent, the forced composure of professional soldiers giving way to the human reality beneath. The writing desk in Rudel's quarters is simple, functional, military in its austerity. A plain wooden surface scarred by years of use, it holds the few personal items he permits himself, a small photograph of his parents, a leather-bound Bible and his personal journal. Unlike his official logbook with its precise documentation of missions and combat statistics, this journal contains his private reflections, thoughts that can never be shared in wartime. The hour is late. Most of the airfield has settled into uneasy quiet, disturbed occasionally by the distant rumble of artillery or the sound of aircraft engines, as night operations continue elsewhere along the front. Rudel sits at the desk, still in his uniform despite the day's accumulated grime and sweat. Bathing is another luxury rationed by wartime necessity. He opens the journal, turning to a blank page. The act of writing has become ritual, a way of processing experiences that military decorum prohibits discussing openly. His pen moves deliberately across the paper. January 5th, 3 missions today. Lost Richter and Steiner over Malin. Both good men, skilled pilots. Richter had a fiancée waiting in Dresden. Someone will need to write to her. He pauses, considering what can be committed to paper, even in this private document. Certain thoughts remain dangerous regardless of where they're expressed. Military discipline and political reality impose boundaries on permissible reflection. Soviet offensive on Central Front confirms what we've seen developing for months. Their resources appear inexhaustible while ours dwindle daily. The men sense it too, not defeatism, but a growing recognition of strategic reality. They continue to fight with extraordinary courage, but increasingly without the conviction of possible victory. The pen stops again. Even here in the privacy of his journal, certain observations feel like betrayal. He was raised to believe in duty, honor, country, absolute values that shouldn't bend to circumstantial pressures. Yet the gap between official pronouncements and frontline reality has become impossible to ignore. A knock at the door interrupts his writing. "Enter," he calls, closing the journal casually but deliberately. Major Sommer appears, his exhausted face suggesting he too has not found time for rest. "Forgive the intrusion, Hans. Command sent a courier with updated reconnaissance reports. I thought you should see them immediately." Rudel gestures to the small table that serves as both dining surface and conference area. Sommer spreads several photographs taken by reconnaissance aircraft earlier in the day, along with a map marked with unit positions. "The Soviet breakthrough is more extensive than initially reported," Sommer explains, indicating the map. "They've penetrated 30 kilometers in this sector, nearly 40 here, multiple armored columns advancing along separate axes." Rudel studies the materials with professional detachment, his tactical mind evaluating options despite fatigue. They are executing a classic double envelopment. If these two spearheads meet here, he indicates a position on the map. 3 of our divisions will be encircled. That's the assessment at headquarters. As well, they're ordering a strategic withdrawal to this defensive line. Sommer traces a position 20 kilometers to the west. "We're to provide continuous air support to cover the retreat." The implications are clear. Another step backward in the seemingly inevitable contraction of the Eastern Front. Territory conquered at tremendous cost during the advance into Russia, now abandoned in the relentless retreat toward Germany's borders. "How many operational aircraft will we have tomorrow?" Rudel asks, the practical question superseding strategic concerns. "Perhaps 10, if maintenance can work miracles tonight. Fuel remains critical, enough for 1 mission per aircraft, possibly 2 if we accept minimum reserves." Rudel nods, mentally calculating the possible impact of such limited resources against the scale of the Soviet advance. The mathematics is unfavorable, but he keeps this assessment to himself. Sommer already understands without it being articulate. "Get some rest, Eric," he tells his colleague. "Tomorrow we'll start early." After Sommer departs, Rudel returns to his journal, adding a brief addendum to his earlier entry. "The men deserve better than this slow dissolution. They deserve leadership equal to their sacrifice." He closes the journal and places it in the desk drawer. The statement comes dangerously close to criticism of the high command, perhaps even of the Führer himself. But Rudel has earned the right to private doubts through years of unquestioning service. Routine reasserts itself as he prepares for sleep. Boots placed precisely side by side, uniform hung carefully on its designated hook, pistol within reach beside the narrow cot. Military habits become second nature over time, creating a semblance of order amidst growing chaos. Before retiring, he writes 2 letters, one to Richter's fiancée in Dresden, another to Steiner's parents in Bavaria. The task is painfully familiar. He has written dozens of similar letters during his years at the front. Each attempts to balance truth with comfort, to convey that their loved one's sacrifice had meaning without resorting to empty patriotic platitudes. The letters complete, Rudel sits momentarily motionless, feeling the day's events settle into memory. 3 combat missions, 5 aircraft lost, strategic disaster unfolding across the broader front, all compressed into 24 hours that feel simultaneously endless and inadequate for all they contained. A soft knock interrupts his thoughts. "Enter," he calls, expecting perhaps Sommer with additional information. Instead, Colonel Weber stands in the doorway, his formal bearing suggesting official business rather than casual conversation. "Forgive the hour, Oberst Rudel. May I have a moment?" Rudel gestures to the room's single chair. Weber remains standing. "I've just received communication from Airfleet headquarters." Weber begins without preamble. "General Ritter has been relieved of command. I am to assume temporary control of all air operations in this sector, effective immediately. The news is surprising but not shocking. As defeat follows defeat, command changes become increasingly frequent. Attempts to find leadership solutions for what are fundamentally resource problems. Congratulations, Herr Oberst, Rudel offers with appropriate formality. Weber dismisses the felicitation with a gesture. There's more. I'm instructed to inform you that you're being considered for transfer to the Western Front. They're forming a specialized anti-tank unit to counter the expected Allied invasion. Your expertise is considered essential. This development is genuinely unexpected. Transfer from the Eastern Front would mean leaving the squadron he has led through countless operations, abandoning comrades with whom he has forged bonds stronger than family. My place is here, Rudel responds, more sharply than intended. My men, it's not decided yet, Weber interrupts. Merely under consideration. I thought you should know. He hesitates, then adds, for what it's worth, I've recommended against the transfer. Your value here outweighs any contribution you might make in the West. The conversation's official purpose complete, an awkward silence follows. The two men have served together for years, their relationship defined by professional respect rather than personal warmth. Yet in this moment, something more human seems to press for expression. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, Weber finally says, his voice lower, the rigid formality momentarily relaxed. We both know what that means for the men under our command. Rudel meets his gaze directly. We do our duty, regardless of strategic context. Of course, Weber nods. Always. He moves toward the door, then pauses. Get what rest you can, Hans. Tomorrow we'll demand everything we have. After Weber departs, Rudel remains seated, considering the implications of the potential transfer. The Western Front represents an entirely different war, different adversaries, different aircraft, different tactical challenges. After years immersed in the particular brutality of the Eastern Front, the prospect of change carries both professional interest and personal reluctance. More significantly, the consideration of his transfer suggests High Command is reallocating key personnel, another indicator of shifting priorities, as Germany's strategic position deteriorates on multiple fronts. The star-filled night sky stretches above the airfield, vast and indifferent to the human conflict below. Despite the biting cold, Rudel stands motionless, face tilted upward, studying the constellation. In the darkness, away from the constraints of daylight duty, he allows himself a rare moment of contemplative stillness. The ancient patterns overhead remain constant while empires rise and fall. Armies advance and retreat. Men live and die. Sleep has proven elusive, despite physical exhaustion. After an hour of restless attempts, Rudel abandoned his cot for the clarity of the night air. The cold sharpens his senses, cutting through the fog of fatigue. The airfield at night presents a different reality than its daytime persona. Activities continue, but with subdued urgency, maintenance crews working under hooded lights, sentries patrolling the perimeter, occasional vehicles moving between buildings with dimmed headlamps. The sounds are different too, the metallic rhythm of tools against aircraft components, the low murmur of conversations, the distant rumble of artillery that never fully ceases. Couldn't sleep either, sir. The voice belongs to Corporal Miller, a perimeter guard whose patrol route has brought him near Rudel's position. Just getting some air. Rudel responds, not wanting to burden the young soldier with the complexities of command insomnia. Miller stamps his feet against the cold, rifle slung across his shoulder. My father said you could always tell a seasoned soldier by how well he sleeps through artillery fire. Guess I'm not seasoned yet. Where is home, Miller? Bavaria, sir. Small village near Berchtesgaden. My father has a carpenter's shop there. You'll return to it, Rudel says with more certainty than he feels. This war won't last forever. The young guard straightens slightly. Of course, sir. Once we drive the Russians back. Rudel doesn't correct the optimistic assessment. Morale remains a commander's responsibility, even in casual midnight conversations. Your father's carpentry. You'll join him in the business? That's the plan, sir. I was apprenticing before all. Miller gestures vaguely toward the eastern horizon, where dawn will eventually reveal the front lines. I can identify 20 types of wood by smell alone. The pride in this Vaseline accomplishment touches something in Rudel's. These are the genuine identities obscured by uniform and rank. The craftsmen, farmers, students, shop clerks temporarily transformed into warriors. Each carries a suspended future, a life interrupted by historical forces beyond individual control. A valuable skill, Rudel acknowledges, more lasting than destroying tanks. Miller seems uncertain how to respond to this philosophical turn from a decorated officer. I should continue my round, sir. Of course. Good night, Corporal. As the guard moves away, Rudel continues his solitary walk around the airfield perimeter. Near the maintenance hangars, lights burn despite the late hour. Inside, he discovers a scene of intense activity, mechanics working on the damaged Stukas, attempting to render them operational for tomorrow's critical missions. Feldman Schmidt directs the operation with the authority of a general, assigning tasks, inspecting work, solving problems as they arise. Seeing Rudel, he straightens from examining an engine. Herr Oberst, we'll have 8 aircraft ready by morning, perhaps 9 if we can salvage parts from Hoffman's wreckage. The maintenance chief doesn't mention what both men understand, that these repairs are increasingly makeshift, components cannibalized from damaged aircraft, specifications compromised by material shortages. Each day requires greater ingenuity to maintain a diminishing force of aging aircraft against an enemy whose resources grow rather than shrink. Your men should rest, Rudel suggests, noting the exhaustion evident on the mechanics' faces. Schmidt shakes his head. We'll rest when the aircraft are ready, sir. Not before. The dedication humbles Rudel. These men work through the night not from fear of punishment, but from commitment to duty, ensuring that pilots have functional aircraft for the next day's mission. Their contribution to the war effort lacks the glory of aerial combat, but matches or exceeds it in importance. Moving on, Rudel approaches the edge of the airfield where new arrivals are being processed, replacement pilots fresh from training schools in Germany. Their youth is shocking, faces barely old enough for proper beards, eyes still holding civilian innocence despite military training. They stand in a small group, smoking cigarettes, voices carrying the distinctive accents of various German regions. As Rudel nears, their conversation halts abruptly. One nudges another, and they snap to attention. At ease, Rudel tells them. You've just arrived. Yes, sir, responds the tallest, apparently the informal leader. Transferred from flight school at Straubing. 11 pilots reporting for duty. 11 replacements for 16 losses in the past week. The arithmetic of attrition working inexorably against them. And these replacements with perhaps half the training hours once considered minimum for combat readiness. How many hours in the Ju-87? Rudel asked. The young men exchange glances. 23, sir, the leader finally answers. Simulator time, mostly. Fuel restrictions at the school. 23 hours, barely enough to master basic handling, let alone combat maneuvering or weapons deployment. Rudel had logged over 200 hours before his first combat mission. These boys will face Soviet fighters with a fraction of that preparation. Report to operations at 0600 for squadron assignment. Rudel instructs them, keeping his voice neutral. Until then, get some rest, sir. The leader steps forward hesitantly. Is it true you've destroyed over 500 tanks? The question catches Rudel off guard. The incongruity of discussing records and achievements while standing under stars that have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. The count isn't important, he responds after a moment. What matters is disrupting enemy operations, providing support for our ground forces. The young pilots nod, though disappointment flickers across their faces. They want legends in this moment, not tactical practicalities. Rudel understands the impulse, the desire for heroes when reality offers mainly hardship and uncertainty. Continuing his nocturnal circuit, Rudel finds himself approaching the runway where his damaged Stuka sits in its dispersal position. In daylight, the aircraft presents a formidable profile, its inverted gull wings and fixed landing gear instantly recognizable. At night, its silhouette becomes more predatory, almost prehistoric in its angular menace. He runs a hand along the fuselage, feeling the patches where bullets and shrapnel have necessitated repairs. Like himself, the aircraft bears the accumulated scars of prolonged combat, external damage concealing more significant internal wear. Man and machine, gradually being consumed by the demands of a war that recognizes neither courage nor exhaustion, only results. The alarm clock sits beside Rudel's narrow bed, its mechanical hands pointing to 15 minutes before it will ring, summoning him to another day indistinguishable from the hundreds before it. The clock's steady ticking, precise, relentless, indifferent, embodies the military existence he has embraced. It demands awakening at prescribed moments regardless of fatigue, readiness, or the events of yesterday. Rudel lies awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had eventually found him after his late-night walk, but it was shallow and brief, his mind processing the day's events even in supposed rest. The pre-dawn darkness feels heavy, pressing down with the accumulated weight of all he has witnessed and all that remains to be done. The room is cold. Fuel shortages mean minimal heating in officers' quarters, another small indicator of the war's direction. He can see his breath forming small clouds that dissipate almost immediately. The discomfort is familiar now, hardly noticed except as a technical observation. His thoughts turn to the coming day. Intelligence reports suggest the Soviet offensive is gaining momentum, their armor advancing along multiple axes toward strategic road junctions and rail lines. The retreat of Army Group Center creates cascading vulnerabilities along the entire Eastern Front. His squadron, undermanned, under-equipped, and exhausted, represents one of the few remaining mobile forces capable of slowing the advance. The mental calculus is grimly familiar: limited aircraft and fuel against nearly limitless Soviet resource. The equation never balances, yet they continue to fight, day after day, mission after mission. Duty distilled to its purest essence, continuing forward motion when strategic purpose has become increasingly abstract. With practiced efficiency, Rudel rises before the alarm can sound. His body protests after yesterday's 3 combat missions, muscles stiff from sustained G-forces and tension. He ignores the discomfort, beginning his morning routine with mechanical precision: 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, maintaining physical condition essential for withstanding the physiological demands of combat flying. Cold water from the basin shocks his system to alertness. No hot water again today, perhaps no more for the duration. He shaves with practiced strokes, the familiar routine requiring minimal conscious attention, allowing his mind to plan the coming day's operation. The face in the mirror shows subtle changes from years of combat stress, lines etched deeper around the eyes, a perpetual tension in the jaw, the weathered complexion of a man who has spent thousands of hours at high altitude. At 32, he looks a decade older, the accumulated cost of responsibility visible in his features. Dressing in his flight uniform, Rudel moves with economical precision, each button fastened, each strap adjusted, the routine so ingrained it requires no thought. Only the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds receives special attention, the weight of Germany's highest decoration, representing not personal glory but the expectations it carries. Fully dressed, he sits at his desk to review the latest intelligence summary delivered during the night. The reports confirm what he already knows: the strategic situation deteriorating rapidly across the entire front. Soviet forces advancing, German units retreating, the inevitable contraction continuing despite localized tactical successes. He closes the folder and checks his watch. Time to wake Henschel and prepare for the morning briefing. Today's missions will be demanding, perhaps more desperate than yesterday's. The familiar cycle continues: plan, fly, fight, return, repeat, until either victory or defeat renders the cycle moot. Rising from his desk, Rudel pauses, a rare moment of hesitation in his otherwise fluid routine. The events of yesterday, the losses, the news from other fronts, all conspire to create a momentary doubt. Not about his duty or his capability, but about the larger purpose, the strategic framework within which his tactical excellence operates. The question that formed in the dawn frost returns. What happens when the most decorated pilot in German history begins to question the cause he serves? He dismisses the thought with practiced discipline. Such philosophical luxuries belong to historians and politicians, not to officers with immediate responsibilities to their men and mission. His duty remains unchanged regardless of strategic context: to lead his squadron, to strike the enemy with maximum effectiveness, to return as many of his pilots as possible to fight another day. The alarm clock finally rings, its mechanical bell sounding unnecessarily in the already awakened room. Rudel switches it off with a decisive motion. Another day begins, outwardly identical to countless others, yet carrying the accumulated weight of all that has preceded it. He sets the alarm for the next morning, an act of faith or habit or simple military discipline. The routine will continue tomorrow, regardless of what today brings. The clock will tick through another 24 hours, measuring out the rhythm of war with mechanical precision. Men will fly, fight, perhaps die, then be replaced by others who will do the same. Picking up his flight log and map case, Rudel moves toward the door. Outside, he knows, the airfield is already coming to life. Ground crews preparing aircraft, intelligence officers updating situation maps, pilots gathering for briefings, the machinery of aerial warfare, preparing for another day of desperate effort against increasingly unfavorable odds. As his hand touches the door handle, Rudel allows himself one final private thought before assuming the public persona of the squadron leader, the decorated officer, the steadfast commander. The question that formed yesterday crystallizes with new clarity. At what point does duty to one's men supersede duty to a cause that appears increasingly lost? Then the moment passes, discipline reasserts itself, and he steps outside to meet the coming day. The pre-dawn air is cold and still, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Soviet forces continue their advance. Somewhere above, the stars that witnessed his nighttime contemplation fade before the approaching day. The routine continues. The clock resets. Another basic day in the life of Hans-Ulrich Rudel begins, indistinguishable from the others, yet unique in the accumulating weight it carries. The question remains unanswered, suspended between duty and doubt, as he walks toward the operations building, where his men await his leadership.